So what I'd like to do now is to show you how you can add a record to the students list. And there are a couple of techniques to do this, but I'm going to show you how to add it in a fairly dynamic way, something that you would see very typically in question 5 in the exam. So before we start, let's just have a look and see what we've got in these records. We've got the name, some sort of ID, and then the age. Now, the ID is the first letter of that person's name in lowercase, plus a whole load of numbers that are all between 1,000 and 9,999. So what we need to do is be able to generate that first, and then we can start to work on adding the record in. So I'm just adding a little stage here to develop our knowledge a bit further. So what we've got here, and this is one thing I do need you to set up, is I've set up 2 subprograms, and they have slightly different parameters. And I've put a little word pass in here. Now, the word pass simply means that you're creating a subprogram, but you haven't done anything with it yet, and Python will ignore it. If you didn't have the word pass in there and you just left it like that, Python would fall over or crash on you. But if you put that in there, Python will just know I've got to create that subprogram. I haven't done it yet, but off we go. And underneath here, what I've done is I've added this add record call, so I'm calling that subprogram there. But what I'm going to do is work on this bit first, and I'm going to show you how this works. So what happens is that when you generate a new student, you're going to ask them for the name, but then you don't want people to have to create their own user ID. You want that created automatically. And we're going to do that using a mixture of the username, the user's name, and a random number. So what I've done is I've taken the parameter as a parameter, the user's name, and I'm going to do something with that in a moment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of that pass, and I'm going to grab myself a random number. This is something you've seen a fair few times now. I'm going to make it between 1,000 and 9,099. And now what I want to do is I want to start to build up this ID. And I'm going to do this in one go, but I'll explain it as I go. So new ID is going to be that name, so that parameter. I'm going to treat it as if it was a list, and remember that before, when we've done lots of work on strings, we've found that strings are actually just lists of characters. I'm just going to grab that first character, so that first letter in person's name. I'm going to change it to lowercase. You've seen that function before, even if you haven't seen it for a little while. And then onto that, I'm going to concatenate or add to the random number, but because a random number is an integer, I need to convert it to a string. And what I now need to do is I now need to get that new ID back to the program, or back to its calling code, so it's actually going to be a function. So there's my new generate ID. So let's just think about what it's doing. It's taking a parameter, the person's name, generating a random number. It's creating a new ID by taking that person's name, grabbing the first letter, converting it to lowercase, and then adding on the string version of that random number. And then finally, it returns the whole new ID. So now what we need to do is actually build the add record procedure or subprogram, and that's quite easy to do. Now, there's a little bit of a technique here that you probably need to get to know. I am going to create a brand new single one-dimensional list. And the reason for doing that is it makes adding to the two-dimensional list a lot easier. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for the user's name. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask for the age. And I now need to create the ID, but I don't need to be ask the user for that. I can do that automatically. So what I'm going to go is going to generate ID, and I'm going to pass it the name that the user entered. So it takes whatever that name is that was stored in there and sends it up to here, and does all its thing, sorts out the ID, returns it, stores it back in here. And then finally, what I can do is I can start to create and build up my new record. And this record is going to have student name, it's going to have my new ID, it's going to have my age. And then the very last step here is to add that to the students list. So I'm just going to add it to the end. And the reason that you create a one-dimensional list is because you can add that one-dimensional list in one go to that student list. So basically what you're doing is adding another one of these just onto the bottom of that student list. So let's just see if I've got that right. So there it is. It asks me for the name. This person, George. I'm going to give George an age of 13. And it hasn't crashed on me, but I don't quite know whether it's worked or not. So I'm just going to put the word students in. And there you can see George. He's got the first bit of his name has been used in the ID, and then we've got this random number between 1,000 and 9,099. So that's the process that I'm using. I've added in this bit about generating the ID as an extra step because I know many of you are strong enough to cope with it. It's quite an advanced idea. But if you're struggling with that, try to focus on this bit where it says create a blank new student, ask for the details, create a whole new record with that, add that new record to the students list.